Fantastic. You know, I always hate starting because all the cool networking and everything that's going on, but you know, we also have some information we want to share and some people we want you to meet. So I'm going to be rude and interrupt you at this point. But for those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I'm Doug Slocum. I go by the call sign, the nickname Odie, and I've been blessed to be the president of the Air and Space Forces Association of Michigan. And actually I'm on the national board now and had my first meeting last week, and I still don't know what the heck I'm doing there. But thank you for being here. We'll start off real quick. We have this tradition here that we have, you know, one of our guest speakers normally come up and do the national anthem. So, no, we're just kidding. Janina, why don't you come up and do that for us?
Anyway, it is always my tradition to invite all of you to participate in the singing of the national anthem. So I shall start in a nice low key. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hail at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you. Have a seat. Have a seat. All right, if we could, real quick, our wonderful hosts here at Mission Barbecue. Yes, we're talking about you folks back here. Thank you for the wonderful hosting. Great food. I don't know. All right, so we are the Air and Space Forces Association. I know I'm going to miss folks if I can. If you're on my executive committee, put your hands up real quick. All right, so we've got Ray, we got Rick, we got Tim, Kim. I don't know who else I'm missing. Oh, right here in front, you're always dual-hatting Brian. But these are the team that helps me make everything happen here. I appreciate their support a ton. Well, we got Ron and Janina back there too. But wonderful team that makes all sorts of good things happen. So thank you to them. Our always enduring partners. Today, helping to specifically sponsor our event today, we have DC3S. Should I say it? Mr. Mary Lamparter and Mary Lamparter. All right, joining us today. And of course, you know, we are a joint service type of an organization. So we have the Navy League. Janina is with the Navy League, and she, you know, greets people at the front door, and she sings the national anthem for us. Who says we're not just bleeding purple? That's military talk for joint service stuff, so that's all good. All right, distinguished guests. Elected officials. Any? There we go. All right, thank you. Clerking, Commissioner, thank you. Sponsors, actually we had 3 that renewed last month with us, so just a shout out once again, American Air Operations. I know that Jim's not here, but this is actually, to use the term, drones is what they do, so I was really hoping he'd be here so we could ask him what the hell is going on in New Jersey, but apparently we can't do that. AEW, I know you have a huge contingent here today, all right, we've got Steve Wayne, everybody else from AEW, hands up. Also wonderful sponsors, thank you for helping us do what we do. And then Sawyer Services, I haven't seen Kim or Rich, but they're a wonderful sponsor that, once again, this helps us do a lot of the things that we're able to do, whether it's a Cyber Patriot, Stellar Explorers, the activities that we have, and so many other things. We're going to talk a little bit more And then, of course, we have Brian down here. You already heard me give him a hard time how we dual hats. He's on my executive committee, but he, in his business, Aero Retirement Options, is also a sponsor. So thank you, Brian, for your continued support and your talents that you bring to us. I always give him a challenge because he tries to record stuff. And if you ever know, I don't sit still, so it drives him nuts. And I don't ever stand where he tells me to stand. So, but to all of our sponsors, Diane, I know you're sitting back here, so thank you so much. Appreciate it. And Ned is with us today. Thank you, Ned, from MCM Learning. Thank you. Also, I think this is the most sponsors we've ever had at a meeting. This is a good thing. One more big round of applause. Speaking of sponsors, I think we're almost to the point where we're going to have somebody that's going to underwrite a lot of the costs. But if you're interested, this should be almost no cost from the way things are setting up. But we're going to do a bus trip down to the Air Force Museum. If you have never been to the National Museum of the United States Air Force, it is absolutely amazing. You can pick your history. Each of these hangars have different eras, all the way from early flight. You can go see the propeller that broke, the Thomas Selfridge crashed, the namesake of our base right out here, all the way to the President, Air Force One type of planes, Cold War, Vietnam era, everything, all, you could spend weeks there. But we're going to go down early on a Saturday, get there by noon, spend 5 or 6 hours. We're going to arrange a nice hotel, group dinner. Next morning, get up, another 5 or 6 hours, bus ride home. We're going to have a little day trip with everybody, a road trip AFAing down to the wonderful Air Force Museum. So if you're interested, that is a Saturday and a Sunday. Please plan on joining us, okay? March 1st and 2nd. The cool thing, as we look at the demographics of the folks sitting in this room, I have initial commitments from the University of Michigan and from Michigan Tech for 11 cadets each. That's 22 college students that are going to go down with us. So if you want to learn something, you want to get inspired with the next generation, here's your opportunity. And speaking of that, I get to do a lot of cool things I get to do around town, but one of them I've done lately, and including with John James' office, but also with Senator Peters, with Lisa McLean, was interviewing Academy cadets, young high school age seniors interested in going to our military academies. And if you ever want to get inspired and want to feel good about the future of our country, you should meet some of the young men and women who are looking to go to these military academies. Coming from Michigan, they're absolutely amazing. But thank you for what you all do in terms of sponsoring them and hopefully giving them the nominations to be able to have that incredible future and serve. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the theme for today, which is Vietnam veterans. As you know, I always like to start off with a little bit of aerospace education. But it is a very controversial time when you talk about the war, but we're really not wanting to talk so much about the war today, but about the people. With that being said, I want to just throw out some facts and frame things for us as we go forward here just a little bit. Numbers of people. This is just the numbers that started off. So in the 1961 to 64 military MAAG advisory group over in Vietnam, before technically the Marines landed in Da Nang in 1965, you can see that the number of troops involved in Vietnam then went up to about 180,000. But look at the overall peak there then in 1968, over 500,000 Americans, boots on the ground in Vietnam as part of this conflict. And then it slowly draws down from there until we divest out in 1972. But the big question is, does everybody remember when Saigon was actually overrun by the North Vietnamese? 1975. So there is a 2.5 to 3 year period there where we'd handed things pretty much over to the South Vietnamese at that point. Ron?
Odie, how does that 536,000 number compare to the number of Chinese who were committed at the same time?
Chinese?
Well, weren't the Chinese communists in
No,
Vietnam?
actually they were not. North Vietnam and China didn't really get along that much. There was some cooperation militarily because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But actually a short time after we finished the war, the two of them fought a war against each other. So no, there were not Chinese.
Well,
there was Viet
assisting
Cong and there was North Vietnamese Army regulars. Viet
Well, I
Cong were
thought there was some foreign country that was assisting North Vietnam.
Russia.
Okay.
Yeah, Russia provided a lot of the armaments and things like that.
Same question, how does the 536 compare to the Russian troops that were committed?
Russian troops there were probably a handful of advisors at best. They didn't want to be directly confronting the United States, so this was a proxy war. All right, did everybody understand the question and the answer on that one? Okay. But to frame the 536,000 people that we had just in the 1 year, today, the end strength of our Army, that's every single person wearing a uniform, 450,000. That's how many people we had in this little country called Vietnam at one point in time. The first people ever killed, they were actually at the same time, so they've actually said that 2 people were the first people that were killed in Vietnam in 1959. Okay, remember we said we didn't call it a war until 1965 when the Marines landed in Da Nang. But these 2 good-looking individuals, I just love how camera technology has changed, but these are the normal pictures from the time. And then the last was actually an Army colonel who's from Michigan, from Menominee, who was killed by artillery, okay, in 1973. Now, there were other Americans killed there after 1975 with the overrun of Saigon, but this was the last one officially credited to the Vietnam War itself. Now, just to make it personal, my dad was actually part of the MAG in 1964. So this is a picture of my dad in 1964. He flew the O-1 Bird Dog, which is a forward air control aircraft. So this little Cessna-looking thing that was paper thin, that was his South Vietnamese observer. So they would go out and they would fly low, try to find the enemy, and tell the fast attack planes and everything else where to go at that point. But the amazing part, there's pictures of my dad with the South Vietnamese division up near the DMZ. He stands about a foot taller than most everybody there. He was only 6 feet tall. But other interesting facts. The first shoot down of enemy aircraft in Vietnam is actually credited to the Navy. So you had some F-4 Phantoms, we'll talk more about F-4s, that shot down a couple MiG-17s, but it was also the first use of the AIM-7 air-to-air missile, which is a radar-guided air-to-air missile. It had the heat seekers that started off first being used in Taiwan in the 1950s that had a great track record, but the first 2 kills in Vietnam were actually by this newfangled, which they figured out later was actually not very reliable, radar-guided air-to-air missile, the AIM-7. At one point in the Vietnam War, we had 155 B-52 bombers stationed in Guam. If you can actually look at this picture, each of these revetments, that's a B-52 bomber. Then it has a little berm around it. But when you look, the rows and rows and rows, and each of these could carry over 70,000 pounds of bombs at a given time. I just can't imagine what the size of the bomb dump for that base must have looked like. The number of explosives, the sheer tonnage that went through there. And just to put that to scope and scale, if we look at our forces today, we have this many bombers, okay? For those of you who do math in public, that adds up to 141. So we had more bombers on Guam bombing Vietnam than we own and use today. All right, so once again, the scope and scale of what was happening at that particular time is just amazing. And if you go to Guam to this day, this base still looks like this. I've landed F-16s there in Guam, and to see all these revettes and everything lined up, we actually parked on this little ramp up here. But that infrastructure is still all in place. The footprint left over from the Vietnam War. Tons of bombs dropped. At some point, we actually used to measure this stuff like it was some measure of how good we're doing. But 2.7 million tons dropped in World War II. Go to Korea, all right, so just a little less than 1 million tons. But then look at what Vietnam, the absolute amount of explosive power that was delivered over the course of the Vietnam War in about a 10-year period. And then we get to precision-guided weapons today, and of course it's a small fraction of that. But once again, when you look at the scope and scale of things that happened in Vietnam, it's just eye-watering. We lost 1,737 aircraft during the war. Most of them were actually from guns on the ground. There's the first bullet that you can see right there, 73%. So this good old-fashioned bullet coming out of a machine gun or a larger type of a gun towards the airplanes. You hear a lot about the surface-to-air missiles. They really were a lot more of a psychological effect, I think, than actual combat impact. But the SA-2, the flying telephone poles, these types of things as a weapon that ended up taking down some of the B-52s as well as some of the other airplanes. And then, of course, the small nation, little Air Force of North Vietnam actually shot down 60 of our airplanes. They would do hit and run types of things against our bombing packages and were quite effective. Well, if you know, we had our hands tied behind our back. We could shoot down their airplanes in the sky. We could look at their airplanes land on their airfields, but we weren't allowed to bomb their airfields. So we could actually sit and watch them land, wait till they took off, and as soon as they took off, they were fair game. These were some pretty goofy rules which to fight a war if you had an objective. Ron, is he allowed to go multiple questions?
Always.
All right, sir.
Odie, I lived during that era, and that was a politically controversial war.
Correct.
Unlike World War II. If it hadn't been for the interference of politicians, was that a winnable war?
Hold that question till a slide later, if you don't mind.
All right.
Okay, hold on to that question. We'll come back to it.
What?
Okay. We think about our involvement in the war, but I also want to scope and scale it. You know, the killed in action, you'll actually see different numbers attributed. You'll see the 53,000 one that I think is official, the number of casualties, killed in actions that have been credited, the number of wounded, missing in action. Now, I actually had to look the last one up. I'm like, CIA? These people all joined the agency? No, that meant captured in action, which I've never heard that acronym before. But of course, our South Vietnamese allies, ARVN, that's what that column is. You can see the number of killed and wounded there. But I don't know if you knew, but it's like South Korea had a very large contingent that came and fought, with us in Vietnam. So did Australia, a few from New Zealand, and then a handful from Thailand involved there. But look at the number of casualties. South Korea is the one I think that probably raised my eyebrow more than anything else. 4,400 South Koreans died in the Vietnam War. All right? But once again, this is, and then of course the North Vietnamese side, hard to attribute, because at one point in time, and this is going to go back to that same slide we'll talk about later, our strategy was to get higher body counts. That was what our tactic was, if you will, to try and win this war. We'll come back to circle to that. POW MIA, so prisoner of war, missing in action. Actually, some folks wearing shirts to that effect today. Missing in action, never accounted for. This is the latest number that I can find to this day. These are the numbers that have not been found, attributed in the Vietnam War. And at one point, we had over 800 prisoners of war. Now, those who were not returned have now been put into the category of missing in action. I actually went to great lengths, and I wanted to show you all today. Do you remember the POW MIA bracelets? Okay. I actually have one that I treasure a lot. I took it out yesterday, and I stinking left it in the middle of my desk today. But it was the one that I have for one each, Digger Odell, if you know our local hero Digger here lately. But I just wanted to, for those old enough to remember, that we used to put the names of the missing in Vietnam on the silver bracelets and wear them in remembrance. And you could get those all over the country, and a lot of folks wore them, even me as a kid. Once again, just being personal, when I was at Travis Air Force Base, my dad was in the Air Force, so I'm what they call a military brat. But one day my dad said, I want you to come out to the flight line. As a kid, that's the last thing I wanted to do, so my heel marks dragging the whole way there. And we waited and we waited. You can see the news cameras and everything, and just to put the age, notice the film reels on top. Okay, so this is the national news. I'm not quite sure. This actually might be my mom, me, and my sister right in front here. I'm not positive. So the C-141 lands at Travis Air Force Base in California. It taxis in slowly, opens the door. Seems like it takes forever. You can actually see somebody standing by the back door of that plane open right there. But it was one of these experiences as a kid. I was witness to what's called now Operation Homecoming. So this was the first prisoners of war from Vietnam landing back in the continental United States. They'd already stopped through Hawaii and had a chance to reacclimate, get cleaned up and everything. But this was the first ones. I was a witness to it. I was a bratty little kid who had no frickin' idea what I was looking at the time. But when my dad passed away, I found a couple of the slides of the pictures. fallout from that, but part of history. But you never know when it comes to the Vietnam War. Once again, I'm telling personal stories. I was passing through a little airport in the Florida Panhandle. Was traveling, I was in the military. Go through security and there was an older gentleman in front with a leather jacket. He and his wife were traveling. And I got chatting with him a little bit. He was kind of fascinating. And I had a chance to sit down for, I don't know, about a half an hour before we got on, the little rubber band powered airplanes that you think you're gonna die in, the little death tubes. So before we got on the little death tube, we had this long talk. Now here's the stupid part. Once again, I never claimed to be a bright person sometimes. I didn't realize till later on who I was having a chance to talk with. Bud Day. And if you know Bud Day, Medal of Honor recipient, POW, one of the most decorated airmen ever in history, Colonel Bud Day was on his way to DC to do some advocacy for veterans. That's who I had an opportunity to talk with. But I really had no clue that's even who it was until later on when I was sitting on the plane. You never know who you're going to meet, I guess is my point. If you have a chance to get to know a veteran and talk to them, pull the stories out, get to know these individuals, because you never know the amazing stories that you're going to be able to hear and experience from our fantastic veterans. Some other, how many people, I showed you each year how many people are serving in Vietnam, but that means over 9 million Americans touched foot at some point in the country of Vietnam during the war. We have about 5.5 of the veterans that are still living to this day. We talked the number that had passed away, but there's almost 200,000 Vietnam veterans here in Michigan today. That's a lot if you think about it. I think we have 600,000 total, last I saw from the census estimates, veterans here in Michigan. 200,000 of them are Vietnam era. The legacy of Vietnam is still a footprint in so many ways. If you didn't know about Agent Orange, I know you've heard that. They had these airplanes, the C-123s, they called them ranch hands, what a great name, that would fly over the country. Here's the strategy. The bad guys could hide in the jungles. So let's put stuff on the jungles and make all the leaves and everything fall off so they have nowhere to hide. So we're basically going to deforest. We're going to kill all the vegetation. So this is what we did. How widespread was it? I think we could call that pretty widespread. How many millions of tons of this stuff were dumped, in some cases directly on our troops serving in the field. And this was a strategy that we had as part of the Vietnam War. Didn't find out later that even though they told everybody it was safe at the time, I think everybody in the military knows, you're getting this shot, you're doing this, don't worry, it's safe. They lied. And certainly today, we know the terrible cost of Agent Orange. The experience was entirely different. When I came back from the Gulf Wars, we were welcomed. I had people buy food. It was not the same. My dad, the Vietnam War veteran, never talked about the experience, never talked about when he came back. It was entirely different experience than what our current generation went through. We're going to touch on that a little bit more here in a bit. And I don't intend to go through all this, but I think everybody knows when you have veterans that have been through an experience, the welcome home like they've had, the exposure to the things that they were exposed to, these are all the repercussions that we have as a result and things that we're dealing with this generation. All right, to Ron's point, this was a political war. It always had been. When we think about the Vietnam War, it stirs a lot of emotions out of individuals. And a lot of times it's because, it was a wrong war. And there could be a very good argument made for that. And I would tell you, Ron, that they never did have they never had a military objective in Vietnam other than to stop the communists, okay? It was part of our strategy of containment. After Korea, we didn't want this incremental increase in the number of countries influenced by communism. So the big picture was we wanted to stop communism. How? We never figured that out. So we got militarily involved in Vietnam, where we had this politically divided country, north and south. By the way, that's never worked out. Look at every other time we've arbitrarily drawn lines between countries or adversaries. That does not bring long-term peace, and it didn't in Vietnam. So we had this unwinnable situation. And And I bring it up, and I'm going to leave it as it was a political war. At one point, we literally tried to kill more North Vietnamese than they could birth and send south to replace them. That was a tactic on our part. I don't know how dumb we could be as a country when it comes to that in terms of the political objectives of a war. However, the men and women who served in Vietnam did spectacularly. We never lost a single battle. They served with honor. We did exactly what our folks in the military did, exactly what they were asked to do. But that's the trouble when we get into a conflict that is politically driven and not, at least with the advice and input from the military leaders themselves. And I would argue that, except for maybe the first Gulf War, where I could make an argument a little bit on the other side, ever since Korea, all of our wars have been political. They have been limited wars with political objectives, which is fine. We are an extension of politics, but at the same time, the military has ended up being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And hence, the Vietnam veterans being stuck in this position of, even though they did absolutely amazing service, not necessarily being recognized as a result of that service. Now that being said, I'm going to quit yapping here for a minute, but I have three Vietnam veterans that are going to come up and tell you their stories today. So, Paul, Dave, I don't care which order we go in. Paul, you want to come first?
Yes, I will.
Okay, well come on up here, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Paul Powell.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you. I just learned a lot of things on this documentary you just gave for veterans. It was outstanding. Let's hear it for him. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming to my bar mitzvah. I mean, you know, I got it kind of wrong, but I'm here in front of you. I belong to Chapter 9. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my educational background and how I joined Chapter 9. The first thing, that my parents had a high expectation of what I was going to be. And when they got kicked out of Servite High School by two nuns, they understand that I had to lower my expectations. You know, how many went to Servite? Anybody in here go to Servite? It's on the far east side. Oh, there's one person who went to Servite. I then went to Finney High School, and I thought I was doing a pretty good job on my education. But when they told me that I had to leave because I was 27, I knew I had a problem there. So I then entered Western Michigan. I heard it was a party school, and I entered Western Michigan. Hey, at 27, I got buy beer and liquor and supply the needs for all the college students. Well, that didn't work out either, because I was told to leave 6 weeks later. So things on the educational program wasn't working very well for me. I then came back, worked at Chrysler's, and I heard that Macomb was offering a 2-year college degree. So I entered Macomb. I figured 2 years I can get 4 years degree. Well, that didn't work out very well either, because I got a letter from a guy named Uncle Sam. And it was a real nice letter. It was on nice paper, and you know, it had the White House on it, and looked pretty good to me. But I didn't know anybody in Washington named Uncle Sam. But I said I was going to fight this. When the MP showed up at my door, I knew I had to leave. So I entered the Armed Services of America. First, it was Fort Knox. I heard there was gold there, but I didn't see any gold. Then it came Fort Gordon. They had Tigerland, but I didn't see any tigers there. Fort Benning Jump School, and I came back. I got 30 days leave, and then to Vietnam. And I went to Vietnam on a commercial flight. And there's something that I'll remember for the rest of my life. When we got off the plane, before we got off the plane, all the stewardesses went up to the front. And one of them was holding her hands on her cross. And they were literally praying for us as we left the plane. That stuck out to me for the rest of my life. They were thinking of us. They were worried about us. They saw how young we were, 18, 19, 20 years old. So we left the plane. And we went 30 miles out to a base, and there were 11 of us. And 5 were going to Delta Company, and 5 were going to Bravo Company. And I was going on a Chinook up into the Central Highlands with 2 105s on it. So we sat at our base. They brought us all our stuff. That was going to be our base back in Tonsinook, just outside of Tonsinook. And lieutenant came and told us what company we were going to be with, and he said, Palazzo, you're going up north, so you'll be here tomorrow, and you're going to leave at 1600 hours. And you'll be able to get a dinner, and you'll be able to get all your equipment. So at that point, I told the other guys goodbye, and they left to their to the Bravo company and Delta company. And I was behind, and the next day I had a nice, I was thinking, Jesus, they gave Jesus Christ his last meal. I'm going to get my last meal here. And it was a warm meal, and off I was out to they called it Cobra Base. But before I left, they told me, Palazzo, get your gun and get all the equipment that you need. Well, geez, oh man, I've got bandoliers on me, grenades and all that. I had so much equipment I didn't know what to do. I could barely walk. And when I got off the helicopter, it was a Chinook. There were 5 guys in a foxhole, and they're all looking at me, and I kept walking with all this equipment. And they said, oh my God, one of them said, geez, old man, I know we're going to win this war this time. Well, you know, I jumped into the foxhole, and they took all the equipment off, told me I was crazy, and look, man, if you need the equipment, they'll drop it off to us. That was the first day, and that day, the sergeant came up to me, and he said, Palazzo, you're going to stick with Danforth and Johnson. You're in the back of the platoon. I says, okay. He says, you're young, we're going to make you get some experience before things start to happen. So on my first day out, we had to cross a river. And it was a very learning experience, because I told myself, when we got onto the other side, you had all these leeches on you and the mosquitoes, and I did not have my backpack right. It stuck into my back. So I was in a lot of pain. And when we got onto the other side, I was on the wrong side next to the radio operator. Shouldn't have been there. Should have been way in the back. And I overheard some general yelling out at Lieutenant Meany, you're on the wrong side of the river. The wrong side of the river. You belong on the other side. That side's going to be hit with artillery. Geez, oh man, now I had to swim back over on the other side. So I made like Johnny Weissmuller, like Tarzan, and swam down to the other side. So that was my first day in Vietnam. I became a staff sergeant. I received a Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, most of it for trying to save men, not to kill men. I came back home, finished my degree at Wayne State, got a degree in business management, in urban planning. Went to work for the city of Detroit. Developed a very good relationship with Coleman Young. Coleman Young used to walk around and swear all the time. And he said, I have something for you. I says, what? He says, I'm going to put you on the casino gaming study. We bring the casinos to Detroit. And I said, I don't know anything about casinos. Pick somebody else. He says, well, you're going to Vegas. You're going to Europe. You figure out 600 pages. At that time, we had 10 hotels that were empty in the city of Detroit. The Cadillac, the Pitt Shelby, the Teller, the Yellowstone Park. Later, we would, Chapter 9 would move into the park and have a homeless shelter in there. So the purpose of bringing casinos to Detroit was to get the hotel space, because we just finished Cobo Hall. We weren't getting the conventions because we didn't have the hotel space. During that year, I joined Chapter 9. 1984, I believe it was, Mike Sands, and we started the commission to build a Vietnam Memorial in Lansing. We raised the $3.5 million to bring that to tuition. We're working on a POW chair. POW chair will probably be put in the library or next to the Vietnam Memorial. And working with Chapter 9, I was able to negotiate the building, the sale of the building, and also our homeless shelter. The homeless shelter was put over on Grand River in Canfield. The Michigan Veterans Foundation, it's called. Tyrone Chapman ran that, and he passed away about 4 years ago. During that period of time, we started the Vietnam Parade, actually the City of Detroit Parade for veterans. Phil, a lot of men helped us get that right. It wasn't just me. Tyrone Chapman, Al Oprah, and you used to remember Al Oprah? Al Oprah did a lot of things here in the city of Detroit and helped us get that parade going. It's now one of the biggest parades in the state of Michigan. It's the only sanctioned parade in the state of Michigan. We start off on Michigan Avenue, go around the train station, and we end up at the IEW building, the Electrical Contractors Union. That parade is going to continue, and I'm really proud of that parade because it does a lot of things. The money that we received from the Illiches, we put into a trust. We now have $1 million for descendants of Vietnam vets. And we also give a lot away with helping with the clothing. Brenda Jones, Council President, Scott Benson. So we do a lot of community things. In saying all that, I had 6 uncles that served in World War II, and they all made it back alive. Uncle Bill Pasalagua, Bill Palazzolo, they were more than 5'3", 5'4". They landed on Normandy. So I learned about faraway places by talking to them. They didn't talk about the war, but they told me the places they went to. The other 4 uncles were in the Pacific. They were in Tawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. They were on ships. Most of these men, they're all passed away now. Uncle Bill Pasalagua, the second cousin, Roy Grammatico, Tony Bommarito, and Vince Bommarito. Those men lived in their 60s. They died very young, if you ask me. So I have a lot of experience about listening to them and all those faraway places they told me about. During that period of time, I had 4 children. And one day my wife was mumbling at the table. I let my wife manage all the money. And she says, we can't do it. And I'm saying, wait a minute, what do you mean we can't do it? We got a house, we got a car, we got a roof over our heads, I got food on the table, I'm working 2 jobs. What can't we do? Well, we had 1 kid at Notre Dame. We had 1 kid at Servite. My daughter just graduated from Regina. We had no money to send her to college. And as a man, I felt it was my obligation to make sure that my kids got a decent education. And I felt hurt about that. My daughter heard about that, and she listened to us talk, and she joined the Navy. I didn't want her to join the Navy. I didn't want her to have those experiences I had. I fought, my uncles fought, so she wouldn't have to fight, excuse me. But she went, and I learned about the Navy. I didn't know one thing about the Navy, people. And every Sunday I'd call, and me and my daughter would talk. She was learning to be an air traffic controller. They placed her on the Kennedy, the biggest carrier at the time. My heart was bubbling with joy. She was one of the first air traffic controllers on the Kennedy. And then they moved her to the Iwo Jima. People, that is one bad ship. We got 2 of them, the Iwo Jima and the Saipan. There's 2,000 Marines on them. They got jump jets, helicopters, Cobras, Cheyennes, pontoon boats that go onto the beaches. I knew there was something up. I had people say, Paul, don't worry about it, she's on a ship. Well, 7 sailors got killed on the USS Cole. It was parked. As a father, I was worried about my daughter. My uncles fought, so she wouldn't have to go. My brother went to Korea, so she wouldn't have to go. I fought, so she wouldn't have to go. So I was worried. And so I called the air base one day, and they said, we can't give you any information. I said, what are you talking about? You can't. It's my daughter. They thought I was kind of crazy. And they said, well, the fleet has left. What do you mean the fleet's left? Where did it go? So anyway, I had a good relationship with Carl Levitt at the time, and I called his office, and they too thought I was kind of crazy. They said, we can't do it. We got 3 million people in the armed services. Well, how can we find your daughter? So again, I was frustrated. And about 4 days later, my daughter called me. Dad, you can't do this, Dad. I'm in the Navy, Dad. I'm in the Navy, Dad. You can't do this. You're embarrassing me, Dad. You can't do it. I'm okay, Dad. Don't worry, Dad. Well, as a father, I was thinking about my wife yelling at me, you gotta get all the bikes fixed before Christmas time comes, and I'll get it fixed. And teaching her how to ride a bike, taking the training wheels off, running along, stay out of the street, stay out of the street. That's what was going through my mind. or teaching her how to drive a car at Mount Alex Cemetery. Watch the tombstones, watch the tombstones. You know, look out. Or when she was dating, I was always cleaning my guns in the kitchen table when the boy come in. He looked, and you know, one time she said, I didn't even get a good night kiss. Is he going to feed you? Is he going to clothe you? Is he going to college for you? That's what a parent worries about. So my daughter made it through. She was over in Afghanistan. She now runs a whole school board. She's got her PhD. I'm very proud of her. And it's about all of us, everybody in this room. When you see a veteran, thank you for our freedom. So in ending all of this that I talked about, hug your kids, love them. And this is the greatest country road. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Wow. Dave? Rocco? Sorry, we have two different Daves here. Let's start with Dave Rocco.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I do have a script because I want to kind of keep this short and sweet. Obviously, the first thing I was going to ask was if there's any other Vietnam vets in the room, and obviously there are. And so, yep, there you go. I love to see that. So with that, the year 2025 will be the 50th anniversary of the close of the Vietnam War. And so for all you Vietnam vets, I wanted to say, welcome home. And the thing of it is that, as Odie was relating to, when we came home, we really didn't receive any kind of welcome like the guys do today. But the fact of the matter remains, a grateful nation does now recognize your service and something that you deserved for so long. So once again, thank you and welcome home. I am David K. Hoffman. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Carol Ann. I have 4 kids and 9 grandkids. And may I also note, with those 9 grandkids, I am thinning on top, of course, for sure. But I love all my grandkids, and I love to have them come over. I tell them every day that I love them and that God loves them also. And one of the things I wanted to note was the fact that I used my GI Bill to get a degree in electronics, and then I finished a 30-year career with Ford Motor Company. And then after that, I went back to school and became a pastor. And then I pastored my church for approximately 7 years, and then I finally retired. So that's pretty much what I'm doing now. My time in service, I was in from 1972 to 1976. I went to basic training in Texas, and then from there I went to my tech school in Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base. And then from there to my first duty station in Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, the great 4th Tech Fighter Wing, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, which was a training base for both pilots and maintenance crews. And with that, we had T-38 Talons, which I'm sure you recognize, and of course, the F-4. Woo! Yeah! I love the F-4. That was my aircraft. And then one of my cool memories of Seymour Johnson Air Force Base was I was on the flight line. I was working a swing shift, and it was dusk. And I had the opportunity to see one of our great inventory spy reconnaissance planes come in, the SR-71. If anybody is familiar with that, that aircraft is just utterly awesome. Sleek, mean, and very extreme. And I might also add that when they parked that thing, it was also very well guarded. So after a year of experience on the flight line, I received my PCS orders to go to Udorn, Thailand, Royal Thai Air Base. And one of the things I remember when I got off the plane there, when they opened the door of the C-41, of which we flew over on, when they opened that door, it was like getting hit with a brick wall. The humidity and the heat was just, wow, like big time big. And so for the next year, I would be exposed to blood, sweat, and monsoons. Forget the tears, because it rained so much that you couldn't see the tears anyway. And so my AFSC in the, for you Air Force types, it was a 4.62, which means I loaded these onto that, which those were general purpose bombs, obviously the F4 Phantom. And for weapons crews, what we did was it consisted of a 4-man team. We had a crew chief and then 3 team members. And we were typically the last ones to see the aircraft leave, the first one to see the aircraft when it returned. And the reason for that was because we would arm and de-arm all the munitions that were on the aircraft. And we had a running saying with weapons that we would say, without weapons techs, it was just another airlines. And typically with those munitions, there was no typical upload of munitions at UDORN for the F4. As Odie had talked about, we loaded AM4s, AM9s, AM7s, a multitude of cluster bombs, and then, of course, general purpose bombs. And one of the things I would note was, if you've ever done any research, if you go out and you type in on the internet the secret war, you'll also find out that we flew many missions into Laos as well. And at that time, again, it was a very, very politically charged time. We were not supposed to be there. It was a neutral country, and yet we did, and we flew missions in there. One of the things that I liked about the F4, at least the the E model, was it carried a nose gun. And it carried a 20mm Gatling gun built by General Electric. And who would have ever guessed General Electric, the maker of washers, dryers, refrigerators, who would have ever guessed that they would build this 20mm Gatling gun? And does anybody remember GE's motto, their company motto? It was, "We bring good things to life." Remember that? Yeah. Well, listen, I can tell you right now that if you got caught in the view of that M61A1 Vulcan, that changed that motto very quickly to, "We bring bad people to death." One little squeeze of that trigger definitely wreaked havoc. So, for my time there, 7 months later, I would become involved in 3 major operations in UDORN. Operation Eagle Pole, the evacuation of Phnom Penh. Operation Frequent Wind, the evacuation of Saigon. And then last but not least, the seizure of the ship, the Mayaguez, and its crew. And just noting some of the statistics that Odie gave was the fact that those men who died on Koh Tang Island were some of the last to be killed during the Vietnam War. And if you go to the Vietnam Memorial Wall in DC, you will find their names at the apex of that wall. And as many as you know, war can be ugly. Some never return from war, excuse me. And around the globe, wherever men and women are involved in war or conflict, there are missing and unaccounted for. My organization is called POW MIA Remembrance Ceremonies. Its mission is to remember and honor the POW MIAs from all wars. In World War II, there were 72,000 missing and unaccounted for. 38,000 of these were deemed unrecoverable. The Korean War had 7,449. The Vietnam War has 1,574. The Cold War has 126, and the current Gulf Wars has 6. This is a POW MIA bracelet. The name inscribed upon the bracelet is that of Major Martin J. Masucci from Royal Oak, Michigan. On October 1st, 1965, while flying interdiction in North Vietnam, Major Masucci's aircraft was shot down. He remains unrecovered to this day. It is for him and others like him that my organization exists. The ceremony we conduct is called the Missing Man Tables of Honors. It contains elements of remembrance. Myself and my honor guard explained to the audience why the table is dressed the way it is and what each element represents. The service is performed with military precision, honoring the service and the dedication of these men, my fellow patriots. These missing must never be forgotten. So in keeping with the Vietnam veterans motto, never shall one generation of veterans forget another, we endeavor to keep this issue in the forefront of the American public's eyes. To never forget the mission to keep searching and pressing our government to account for all our missing. The families deserve the return of their loved ones as well as the closure it brings. If you would like to host one of these ceremonies, I have business cards up here for you. Thank you very much for the time to address you this morning.
Dave Rocco, now, if you would please come up, our third speaker today. U.S. Army Artillery, 1967 to 68, right?
66 to 67.
68, 67. Dave?
Good morning. I want to thank the Air Force Association and Mission Barbecue for hosting this event for us. I'm a member of Chapter 154 of Vietnam Veterans. We're located out of Mount Clemens. Mission Barbecue does a lot for our chapter. We sure appreciate them. A little bit about myself. I was born in Detroit. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh my God, this guy's starting off where he's born. We're going to be here till Christmas Eve. But no, I'll speed it up for you a little bit. When I was 10 years old, the expressway took our house, and we moved to East Detroit. I went to South Lake High School, and then I went out to Walsh College for accounting. I married a Regina girl. And then I got a letter from Uncle Sam asking my request for the Army. So I headed off to Fort Carson, Colorado, where I took basic training there, and on to advanced training as an artillery cannoneer. That was, my MOS was a 13-810 artillery, a 105 millimeter howitzer. One day the first sergeant called me into his office, and he said, Rocco, he says, you're leaving us. I says, well, where am I going, Top? He says, well, I'll give you a hint. He said, the initials are Victor November, you figure it out. So off to Cu Chi, Vietnam, the 25th Division. I went there in 66 as an artillery cannoneer. We have any artillery people in here? Well, I'll explain a little bit about the artillery to you. I was on a 105 millimeter howitzer. The shell on a 105 is about, yay big, about the size of a softball maybe. And you got the canister, which is the shell casing. You got the projectile, which sits on top of that. And on top of that, there's a little cone that looks like an ice cream cone. That's the fuse. Okay, and now the artillery is composed of usually three different components. You got your forward observer, who is up front with the infantrymen. He calls in the artillery, but he doesn't call it into the guns. He calls it in back to the base camp where the fire direction center is. This is where all the brains are. These are the mathematicians with the slide rules. They do all the calculations, okay, and then they forward it on to the guns. Now that shell casing I was telling you about, it comes with 7 powder bags. I'm sure you all played cornhole. Well, figure those little bags, but figure them with gunpowder in them, and figure 7 of them tied together like sausages on a string, and they're numbered 1 through 7. Okay, so if the forward observer calls in artillery, he'll call it into the fire direction center. They do all the calculations, and then they'll forward that information to the guns, and they'll say, okay, we're going to use powder bag number 3. So you hold up the powder bags, and you cut off 3, you throw the rest of them down the side, and 1, 2, 3 goes in the canister, and then it'll tell you what kind of fuse to put on top of there. You got different kinds of fuses. You might have a white phosphorus or a point detonating or an armor piercing, and you put that all together. And then they'll give you the instructions on the trajectory for the gun, and the vertical and the horizontal, and then bang, there you go. That's pretty much how the artillery works. Well, then it was time to come home. I was very fortunate. 58,000 didn't come home. I came home, and when I came home, I joined the VFW, And there was a post, I think it was on Gratiot somewhere in Roseville, and I went in there and I bellied up to the bar and I introduced myself, and unfortunately they made fun of me. And these were veterans, you know, and they said, "Oh, we got a soldier boy here back from a police conflict or whatever," you know, and you know, like we weren't using real bullets over there or something. It really, you know, 58,000 were killed, 2,654 from Michigan, 132 from this county, Macomb County, lost their lives. So I finished up my beer and I left. And I didn't go back into the VFW until 40 years later. I mean, it was really, really hurt me. You know, if I was in an airport, say in San Francisco, and some long-haired hippie came up to me and ridiculed me, I could have considered the source and maybe taken that. But another veteran, that was like a stab. And this not only happened to me, it happened to a lot of the veterans. And this is one of the main reasons how the Vietnam veterans chapters got into organizations. We said, well, we're gonna form our own organizations for our own benefit, especially with the problems that we had with Agent Orange and different things like that. So I was very fortunate. I came home, and that's really about all I have. You have any questions? I'm glad to answer them for you. If not, thank you, and Bona Natale.
Well, thank you, Dave. Our standard, by the way, I meant to give these out as they were talking. Excuse me. Our speaker gifts are engraved big-ass bullets. So each of our speakers, if you would, I'm not going to even try and unwrap, but Dave. So we're not quite done. Hang with me for just one more second. The experience for those coming back from Vietnam, as you heard, was entirely different from those from my generation. When we came back, I can remember coming back from the first Gulf War, going through the airport, up the escalator, and there was a lady in front. She kind of took a double take. I was in my uniform. And I was kind of looking, going, well, that was kind of a weird double take. And all of a sudden, she turned around and started running down the escalator. I thought I was under attack at this point. But what she did was actually, she hugged me. But that was the kind of reception that we got after the first Gulf War. You know, the first time I ever had, I remember very clearly, I was sitting in a Red Robin, you know, one of the hamburger joints, sitting there, and I was talking, and the waitress came up and said, "Did I hear you say, you know, that you came back yesterday from, you know, the Middle East?" I said, "Yep." The first time I ever had a meal bought for me. You know, it was comped on the restaurant. But absolutely emotional. Our Vietnam veterans had an entirely different experience. And just to drive that point home just a little bit.
Can I help you?
Just a cup of coffee, please.
Coming right over. Oh, there's no charge.
Thank you.
Here you go.
Thanks again.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
Can I take a picture?
Sure.
All right, smile. There you go. Sir, my son would like to ask you a question. Are you a hero too? That man said you were.
I just served as best I could.
Can we take a picture?
Sure.
Alright, smile big. You say, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your support.
when's your moment? Our moment is now. Vietnam veterans, would you please stand? Welcome home, ladies. Please stay standing. John James team, you have some pins to hand out here. I'm not sure we have enough, but some nice pins, a recognition for your service for Vietnam. But brothers, sisters, welcome home. We love you, and thank you for giving us this opportunity just to say a little bit, we love you this Christmas season.